June 22, 1941, 3:15 a.m. Soviet-German border near Brody, Ukraine. The first Tiger tank won't roll off the production line for another year. The Panther is still a sketch on an engineer's drafting table. Right now, in this pre-dawn darkness, Oberleutnant Heinrich Eberbach sits in the turret of his Panzer III, watching the eastern horizon through his periscope, waiting for the artillery barrage that will signal the beginning of Operation Barbarossa. His 50mm gun, adequate against Polish tankettes and French Renaults, points towards Soviet territory. He has been told the enemy possesses nothing that can threaten German armor supremacy. He is catastrophically wrong. 600 kilometers to the east, in a rail yard outside Kiev, Senior Lieutenant Dmitry Levernenko sleeps in the crew compartment of his T-34 Model 1940. The machine around him represents a revolution in armored warfare, though the Germans don't know it yet. Its 76.2mm F-34 gun can punch through any German tank at ranges exceeding 1 kilometer. Its sloped armor, set at 60 degrees on the glacis plate, effectively doubles its protection, making the 45mm of steel behave like 90mm. The Christie suspension system, adapted from an American design the Soviets purchased in the 1930s, gives it cross-country speed that will shock German commanders. Most importantly, it is designed for mass production in a way German tanks never will be. Wide tolerances, simple systems, components that semi-skilled workers can assemble. In 4 hours, Eberbach's world will change forever. But the warning signs have already been ignored. 3 months earlier, in March 1941, Fremde Heost, Foreign Armies East, the Wehrmacht intelligence branch responsible for Soviet analysis, submitted a report to the Oberkommando des Heers, the German Army High Command. The document, compiled by agents and military attachés who had observed Soviet exercises, contained alarming information. The Red Army possessed a new medium tank with capabilities exceeding anything in German service. The T-34, as Soviet designations identified it, mounted a 76mm gun, possessed sloped armor that deflected anti-tank rounds, and demonstrated remarkable mobility across difficult terrain. The report landed on desks in Berlin, where it was read, annotated, and largely dismissed. At the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler reviewed intelligence summaries with the contempt he reserved for information that contradicted his preconceptions. The idea that Slavic subhumans, his terminology, repeated in countless speeches and private conversations, could design and produce superior weapons offended his racial ideology. When presented with estimates of Soviet tank production capacity, he laughed. Propaganda numbers, he told his staff. Stalin wants us to believe he has thousands of modern tanks. He has rust buckets. The Führer's confidence stemmed partly from the Winter War of 1939-40, where Finland's tiny army had humiliated Soviet forces, destroying hundreds of obsolete T-26 and BT tanks with Molotov cocktails and anti-tank guns. If the Finns could butcher Soviet armor, Hitler reasoned, what did Germany have to fear? General Feldmarschall Walther von Brauchitsch, Commander-in-Chief of the German Army, shared this assessment. German doctrine emphasized tactical superiority and combined arms coordination. Even if Soviet tanks possessed technical advantages, which Brauchitsch doubted, German crews were better trained, German tactics more sophisticated, German coordination between armor, infantry, and air support unmatched. Tank-for-tank comparisons missed the larger picture. War was not a vehicle specification contest. General Oberst Franz Halder, Chief of the General Staff, was more cautious but reached similar conclusions. His staff had analyzed the Fremde Heost reports and noted several factors that minimized the threat. First, Soviet tank production facilities were concentrated in industrial centers that would be captured early in any invasion. Second, Soviet logistics and maintenance systems were primitive. Even if the T-34 was technically superior, keeping thousands operational across vast distances would prove impossible. Third, the Red Army Officer Corps had been decimated by Stalin's purges of 1937-38, when tens of thousands of experienced commanders were arrested, executed, or sent to gulags. The Soviets might have good tanks, Halder's analysis concluded, but they lacked the leadership to use them effectively. Only a few voices dissented. General Oberst Heinz Guderian, architect of German armored doctrine and commander of Panzer Group II, read the intelligence reports with growing unease. Guderian understood tanks not as abstract statistics, but as tools whose effectiveness depended on specific design choices. The 50mm gun on his Panzer III was already marginal against heavily armored targets. If the Soviets truly possessed sloped armor effective against this caliber, German tanks would need to close to point-blank range, sacrificing their tactical flexibility. He requested meetings with ordnance officials, pushing for accelerated development of more powerful guns and heavier armor. His concerns were noted and filed away. Germany would fight the war with the panzers it had. The intelligence failure wasn't purely about arrogance, though arrogance played its role. German reconnaissance had observed T-34s during Soviet maneuvers near the border, but these sightings were limited and ambiguous. The Soviets kept their best equipment away from German observation posts. Most Wehrmacht officers who saw Soviet tanks before Barbarossa saw obsolete models, T-26 with thin armor and weak guns, BT-series cavalry tanks that looked fast but fragile. These machines reinforced existing assumptions about Soviet inferiority. Moreover, the Germans fundamentally misunderstood Soviet industrial capacity. Western intelligence had long underestimated Soviet production capabilities, viewing Stalin's five-year plans as propaganda rather than actual economic transformation. Yes, Soviet factories were primitive by German standards, less automated, less precise, cruder in finish. But this crudeness was strategic. The T-34's wide tolerances meant that slightly misaligned parts still fit together. Its diesel engine, though less refined than German gasoline engines, was more fuel-efficient and less prone to fires. Its simple transmission, though harder to shift than German synchromesh systems, could be repaired by mechanics with basic tools. June 22, 1941. 6:47 a.m. Outside Radzicha, western Ukraine. Oberleutnant Eberbacher's Panzer III lurches forward across the shallow stream, water spraying from its tracks. The artillery barrage has lifted. Smoke drifts across the landscape from burning Soviet border posts. Around him, the entire 11th Panzer Division advances, tanks, half-tracks, trucks, motorcycles, a mechanical tide rolling east. The morning sun breaks through scattered clouds. Everything proceeds according to plan. Radio chatter fills his headset. Unit positions, objectives confirmed, resistance minimal. The Soviets are retreating in confusion, just as intelligence predicted. Eberbacher's company has been ordered to secure the road junction 5 kilometers ahead, then push toward Brody. The war is 6 hours old, and it already feels like victory. Then his gunner, Unteroffizier Klaus Becker, shouts into the intercom. Tank. Bearing 030, 800 meters. Eberbach swings his periscope. There, emerging from a copse of birch trees, a Soviet tank unlike anything in the recognition manuals. Low silhouette. Sloped armor catching the morning light at strange angles. A long gun barrel traversing toward them. It moves with surprising speed across the broken ground, its wide tracks barely sinking into the soft earth where German tanks would bog down. Identify. Eberbach orders, but Becker is already uncertain. Unknown type, Herr Oberleutnant. Not a T-26. Not a BT bigger. The Soviet tank stops. Its turret completes its traverse. Eberbach has perhaps 3 seconds to make a decision that will define the rest of his war, if he survives the next minute. Fire, he shouts. The 50mm gun cracks. Through his periscope, Eberbach sees the tracer arc across the field. The round strikes the Soviet tank's glacis plate dead center. A perfect hit. Becker is an excellent gunner. The shell ricochets upward, sparking harmlessly into the air. The sloped armor, that 60-degree angle, has deflected their best shot as if Becker had thrown a stone. Eberbacher's stomach tightens. This isn't supposed to happen. German anti-tank doctrine is built on the principle that a well-aimed 50mm round will penetrate any Soviet armor at this range. The Soviet tank fires. The 76.2mm shell covers 800 meters in less than a second. It punches through the Panzer III's 30mm frontal armor like paper, continues through the fighting compartment, kills Becker instantly, severs Eberbacher's left leg below the knee, and exits through the rear hull in a spray of metal fragments. The tank fills with smoke and the smell of blood and explosive residue. Eberbach is screaming. He can hear himself screaming, but training overrides pain. Bail out. Bail out. He holds himself up through the commander's hatch, using his arms because his leg is gone, tumbles off the tank's hull onto the grass. His driver and radio operator are already running toward a drainage ditch. Behind them, the Panzer III begins to bang. The Soviet tank advances. Eberbach, lying in the grass bleeding out, watches it roll past his position 50 meters away. The low profile makes it harder to hit. The wide tracks distribute its weight, so effectively it seems to glide over terrain. The gun, that damned long gun, swivels toward his second platoon. Another German tank explodes. Then another. Across the front, from the Baltic to the Black Sea. This scene repeats with variations. Annihilated, Lithuania. A company of Panzer IS, light tanks armed with 20mm autocannons designed for reconnaissance, encounters 3 T-34s and is annihilated in 4 minutes. The 20mm rounds bounce off Soviet armor like hail. The T-34s methodically destroy all 12 German tanks before withdrawing. Near Lutsk, a battalion of Panzer IVs, Germany's heaviest tanks in June 1941, mounting short-barreled 75mm guns, engages Soviet armor at close range. The Panzer IV commanders discover that their guns, designed to fire high-explosive rounds at infantry and fortifications, lack the muzzle velocity to penetrate T-34 armor at any angle. They score hits. The hits do nothing. The T-34s return fire with devastating accuracy. The pattern is consistent. German tanks engage what they believe are standard Soviet armor, fire at ranges where their guns have proven effective against all previous opponents, watch their rounds ricochet or fail to penetrate, then die when the T-34s shoot back. The 76.2mm F-34 gun, firing armor-piercing rounds at 662 meters per second, can penetrate 69mm of vertical armor at 1 kilometer. No German tank in service in June 1941 has frontal armor exceeding 50mm. The T-34 can kill from distances where German tanks cannot harm it. But the carnage is not one-sided, and this is where the paradox of the T-34 emerges. Despite technical superiority, Soviet tank formations are being destroyed in catastrophic numbers. The reasons are complex and will take German commanders months to fully understand. First, Soviet command and control is primitively inadequate. Most T-34s in 1941 lack radios. Tank commanders communicate through flag signals or by poking their heads out of hatches and shouting. German tanks, by contrast, all have radios. A German platoon leader can coordinate his 5 tanks, directing them to attack from multiple angles, concentrating fire, exploiting tactical opportunities. Soviet tanks often fight as individuals, each crew making decisions in isolation. Second, Soviet crews are poorly trained. The pre-war tank corps has been gutted by Stalin's purges. Experienced commanders are dead or in gulags. Their replacements, junior officers promoted because of political reliability rather than competence, have often received only weeks of instruction. Many drivers have fewer than 10 hours behind the controls. Gunners fire practice rounds once, maybe twice, before going into combat. They don't know their vehicle's capabilities. They don't know how to exploit their advantages. Third, Soviet logistics are collapsing. T-34s are mechanically reliable compared to early model German tanks, but they still require fuel, ammunition, spare parts. The German advance is so rapid that supply lines cannot keep pace. Tanks break down, thrown tracks, engine problems, transmission failures, and are abandoned because no one can repair them. Crews evacuate perfectly functional T-34s because they've run out of diesel. The roadsides of Ukraine become graveyards of Soviet armor, much of it undamaged by enemy action. Fourth, German tactical sophistication compensates for technical inferiority. When a panzer company encounters T-34s it cannot penetrate frontally. It doesn't charge blindly forward. It maneuvers. One platoon fixes the Soviet tanks with frontal fire, ineffective but distracting, while another swings wide to attack from the flank or rear, where armor is thinner. German tanks work with infantry, using 88mm anti-aircraft guns and ground roll as tank destroyers. These weapons, designed to shoot down bombers, fire shells with enough velocity to penetrate T-34 armor at any angle. The Luftwaffe provides close air support, Stuka dive bombers attacking Soviet tank columns with remarkable precision. So the T-34s die. Not because they are inferior machines, they are superior machines, but because superior machines operated by unprepared crews, without fuel or ammunition, without coordination or command structure, without air cover or infantry support, become metal coffins. At field headquarters, German commanders file after-action reports. The reports acknowledge the T-34's capabilities with varying degrees of alarm. Some describe it as a serious threat requiring immediate countermeasures. Others note its existence but emphasize that Soviet tactical incompetence negates its advantages. The reports flow up the chain of command to Berlin. In the Reich Chancellery, Hitler reads summaries. Yes, the Soviets have some good tanks. But look at the results. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners, thousands of Soviet tanks destroyed, entire armies encircled. The Wehrmacht is advancing 30 kilometers per day. By this metric, the T-34 is irrelevant. German superiority is confirmed. General Feldmarschall von Brauchitsch reviews the tactical situation and concurs. Soviet resistance is crumbling. Moscow will fall before winter. Only Guderian, now racing towards Smolensk with his panzer group, understands what the reports really mean. The T-34 is not irrelevant. It is premature. The Soviets have deployed a revolutionary weapon before they learned how to use it, before their military culture could absorb its implications. But cultures adapt. Armies learn. And when they do, if they do, Germany will face an enemy with both superior equipment and the competence to employ it. He requests, again, accelerated development of heavier German tanks. His request is noted. Production priorities remain unchanged. Oberleutnant Eberbach wakes up in a field hospital 3 days later, his leg amputated below the knee. The morphine makes everything soft and distant, but one memory remains sharp. That Soviet tank, rolling through his position, its sloped armor glinting in the morning sun, invulnerable. He asks the doctor what kind of tank it was. The doctor doesn't know. No one knows yet. The recognition manuals are being rewritten. September 1941. Kharkov Locomotive Factory No. 183, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. The factory floor spans 4 hectares, a cathedral of industrial production lit by arc lights and the glow of welding torches. The noise is overwhelming. Pneumatic hammers, metal presses, cutting torches, the shriek of steel against steel. 200 meters down the assembly line, a T-34 hull moves on rails, workers swarming over it like ants on carrion. Every 18 minutes, another completed tank rolls out the delivery doors. Alexander Morozov, chief designer of the T-34, walks the production floor with a clipboard, noting efficiency improvements. He is 36 years old, balding, wearing a simple engineer's coveralls stained with machine oil. Nothing about his appearance suggests he has designed the most influential tank of the 20th century. He stops at Station 47, where workers are welding the glacis plate to the hull. The welds are crude, thick beads of metal, uneven, aesthetically ugly. German engineers would reject this work as substandard. Morozov approves it immediately. Does it hold? He asks the foreman. Holds fine, comrade designer. Then it's good enough. Next tank. This is the philosophy that will win the war. Good enough, fast enough, cheap enough to make in overwhelming numbers. The T-34 is not a precision instrument. German tanks are precision instruments. Tight tolerances, carefully machined parts, beautiful engineering. They take 3 times longer to build and require skilled craftsmen at every stage. The T-34 requires welders who learned their trade 3 months ago. Machinists working to tolerances measured in millimeters rather than microns, assemblers who bolt components together without understanding the theory behind them. The armor plates arrive from the Mariupol Metallurgical Combine, cut to approximate size by workers who have never seen a tank. The plates are hardened through a process that introduces slight variations in thickness, some sections 47 millimeters, others 43 millimeters, acceptable within specifications because the sloped angle compensates for inconsistency. German armor is uniform to within a millimeter. Soviet armor is close enough, and close enough works when you're building thousands of tanks instead of hundreds. The V2 diesel engine, a masterpiece of simplified design, consists of fewer than half the parts of a comparable German gasoline engine. It produces less horsepower per liter, runs rougher, requires harder shifting, and will propel a T-34 across 500 kilometers of the worst terrain on Earth without major maintenance. German tanks carry gasoline, which burns spectacularly when penetrated by anti-tank rounds. Soviet tanks carry diesel, which is less volatile, less likely to explode, and available in greater quantities because it's easier to refine. The transmission is notoriously difficult to shift. Crews complain that changing gears requires a hammer to pound the lever into place. Morozov has heard these complaints. He has declined to redesign the transmission because doing so would delay production by months. Better a clunky transmission than no transmission. Crews will adapt. The gun, the 76.2mm F-34, is produced at Artillery Plant No. 92 in Gorky, 900 kilometers to the northeast. The barrel is forged, bored, rifled, and tested in an integrated process that prioritizes speed. Each gun receives approved firing, 3 rounds at maximum charge to ensure the barrel doesn't rupture. If it survives, it's approved. German guns receive extensive testing, accuracy checks, bomb measurements verified to microscopic tolerances. Soviet guns are tested for one criterion. Do they fire without exploding? Yes. Ship them. This industrial philosophy is about to save the Soviet Union, because 400 kilometers west, the German army is advancing on Moscow. Guderian's panzer groups have encircled hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers at Kiev. The Wehrmacht is winning every battle, destroying Soviet armies faster than Stalin can replace them. In October, German reconnaissance units will reach the suburbs of Moscow, close enough to see the Kremlin spires through binoculars. But they will not take Moscow. And one reason they will fail is that Soviet tank production, far from collapsing as German intelligence predicted, is accelerating. In September 1941, Soviet factories produce 519 T-34s. In October, production reaches 612. In November, despite the Germans reaching the outskirts of Moscow, production hits 720 tanks. These numbers seem impossible to German planners, who calculate production capacity based on precision manufacturing standards. The calculations are correct for German methods. They are irrelevant for Soviet methods. The Soviets are also preparing for catastrophe. As German armies advance, Stalin orders the evacuation of entire factories. Kharkov Locomotive Factory No. 183, the birthplace of the T-34, is dismantled and shipped east. Rail cars carry machine tools, steel stockpiles, even entire buildings cut into sections. 50,000 workers and their families evacuate by train to Nizhny Tagil in the Ural Mountains, 1,500 kilometers from the front lines. The evacuation is chaos. Trains derail. Equipment is lost. Workers die from exposure during the journey. But by December 1941, Factory No. 183 is producing T-34s in Nizhny Tagil, beyond German bomber range, in a facility that will soon outproduce all of Germany's tank factories combined. Other factories evacuate to Chelyabinsk, Sverdlovsk, Omsk, industrial cities in the Urals and Siberia that didn't exist 20 years earlier. Stalin's 5-year plans, those supposedly fraudulent propaganda exercises, have created an industrial base in Russia's interior specifically because Soviet planners anticipated invasion. The factories are crude, hastily built, under-equipped. They produce tanks anyway. Meanwhile, German tank production struggles with different problems. In September 1941, German factories deliver 247 tanks of all types, Panzer IS, 3s, 4s, and Command variants. This is actually an increase from summer production, achieved through extended work shifts and priority allocation of steel. German factories are operating at near maximum capacity. The arithmetic is damning. Soviet factories produce more than twice as many tanks as German factories, and the Soviet tanks are better. Not better finished, German tanks are beautifully made, with carefully fitted hatches, smoothly operating controls, ergonomic crew layouts. But better where it matters: gun, armor, mobility. German ordnance officials respond by accelerating development of new designs. The Panther tank, conceived specifically as a response to the T-34, moves from concept to prototype. It will incorporate sloped armor, a powerful 75mm high-velocity gun, better mobility. It will be magnificent. It will also be complex, expensive, and require another year of development before production begins. The Tiger tank, even heavier and more powerful, is prioritized. Its 88mm gun can destroy any Soviet tank at 2 kilometers. Its armor is nearly impenetrable frontally. It is also a maintenance nightmare, requires specialized transport, consumes fuel at a prodigious rate, and will never be produced in numbers exceeding 1,350 tanks for the entire war. The fundamental problem is one of industrial philosophy. German engineering culture values excellence, the best possible tank, built to the highest standards, incorporating the latest innovations. This culture produces magnificent machines. It cannot produce them quickly or cheaply. Soviet engineering culture values adequacy. A tank good enough to do the job, built quickly enough to matter, cheap enough to replace losses. This culture produces crude machines. It produces them by the thousands. At Kharkov, before the evacuation, Morozov holds a meeting with factory managers. They propose design improvements, better optics for the gunner, an improved transmission that shifts smoothly, thicker armor on the turret roof, a more comfortable seat for the driver. Each improvement would make the T-34 a better tank. Morozov rejects all of them. Every hour we spend improving the design is an hour we don't spend building tanks, he says. The tank that exists is better than the perfect tank that doesn't exist. Build them faster. This conversation, or variations of it, repeats at Soviet design bureaus throughout 1941 and 1942. Designers propose improvements. Production managers reject improvements. The T-34 model 1941 is nearly identical to the model 1940. The model 1942 introduces minimal changes, a simplified turret that's faster to cast, a slightly modified hull that requires fewer welds. These aren't improvements in performance. They're improvements in production speed. By December 1941, when German forces finally stall outside Moscow, exhausted and freezing and overextended, Soviet factories have produced more T-34s in 6 months than Germany will produce Panther and Tiger tanks in the entire war. Most of these T-34s have been destroyed, lost to mechanical breakdown, German anti-tank guns, Luftwaffe attacks, crew inexperience, fuel shortages, the chaos of retreat. It doesn't matter. More are coming. In the Ural mountain factories, women who have never worked metal before learn to weld armor plate. Teenagers operate lathes, producing drive sprockets and road wheels. Engineers design jigs and fixtures that allow unskilled workers to assemble complex mechanisms. The entire Soviet economy reorients toward tank production with a ruthlessness that totalitarian systems enable and democratic societies cannot match. German intelligence observes Soviet production through various means: reconnaissance flights, agent reports, prisoner interrogations. The reports flow to Berlin with estimates: Soviets producing 500 tanks per month, perhaps 700 in peak months. These estimates are treated skeptically. Surely the numbers are inflated. Surely Soviet production will collapse as German armies capture industrial centers. The estimates are, if anything, conservative. By late 1942, Soviet tank production will exceed 2,000 vehicles per month. By 1943, monthly production will reach 2,400 tanks, of which 1,200 are T-34s. The remainder are light tanks and heavy tanks, but the T-34 is the backbone, reliable, cheap, effective enough. At the Reich Armaments Ministry, officials understand they are losing the production war. Albert Speer, who will become armaments minister in 1942, later writes that Germany's tank production in 1941 to 1942 was criminally inadequate. He's correct, but increasing production requires resources Germany doesn't have: more steel, more machine tools, more skilled workers. German factories are also producing trucks, aircraft, artillery, submarines, locomotives, all competing for the same limited resources. Soviet factories produce tanks and more tanks. Everything else is secondary. By the end of 1941, the strategic picture is clear to anyone willing to see it. Germany has better tactics, better training, better coordination. The Soviet Union has more tanks, simpler tanks, and the industrial capacity to replace losses indefinitely. The war has become a race between German skill and Soviet quantity. Oberstleutnant Erhard Raus, commanding a panzer regiment on the Moscow front, writes in his diary, "We knock out 10 of their tanks for every one we lose. They build 15 for every 10 we destroy. The mathematics are against us." The mathematics are indeed against Germany, but in Berlin, Hitler and his staff continue to believe that one more offensive, one more encirclement, one more brilliant tactical victory will break Soviet resistance. The idea that crude Soviet tanks, built by barely trained workers in primitive factories, could defeat the Wehrmacht is unthinkable. In Nizhny Tagil, factory number 183 works 3 shifts per day. The assembly line never stops. Every 18 minutes, another T-34 rolls toward the front. March 1943. Tankergrad, Chelyabinsk, Ural Mountains. The factory complex sprawls across 12 square kilometers, a city of steel and smoke where 45,000 workers produce tanks, artillery tractors, and diesel engines 24 hours a day. The temperature outside is minus 18 degrees Celsius. Inside the main assembly hall, it's 32 degrees from the heat of forges and welding stations. Steam rises from workers' bodies as they move between stations, assembling T-34s at a rate of 27 per day. Lieutenant Maria Oktyaberskaya stands beside Assembly Line 7, watching her tank take shape. She is 40 years old, a telephone operator from Tomsk who sold all her possessions to buy this T-34. The telegram she sent to Stalin was simple. My husband was killed fighting fascists. I want revenge. I have purchased a tank. I will drive it myself. Stalin approved her request. Now she watches workers install the V2 engine, bolt the transmission into place, mount the 76.2 mm gun. The tank is designated Fighting Girlfriend at her request. The name will be painted on the turret in white Cyrillic letters. She is one of 16,000 Soviet women who will serve in armored units during the war. She is also a symbol of how drastically Soviet tank warfare has evolved since June 1941. The Red Army that collapsed before Operation Bagration, disorganized, poorly trained, tactically inept, has transformed itself into a mechanized force that German commanders now fear. The transformation did not happen through inspiration or ideology. It happened through blood. In the 18 months since Bagration began, the Red Army has lost approximately 20,000 tanks. 20,000. The number is almost incomprehensible. More tanks than Germany will produce during the entire war, destroyed in a year and a half. The losses include most of the pre-war tank corps, most of the experienced crews, most of the officers who understood armored warfare. But armies learn, and the Soviets have learned faster than their enemies anticipated. The learning process was Darwinian. Units that adapted survived, units that didn't adapt died, and the survivors passed their knowledge down. By March 1943, Soviet armored doctrine has crystallized around principles that maximize the T-34's strengths while minimizing its weaknesses. Principle 1. Concentrate overwhelming force at decisive points. Soviet commanders have abandoned the pre-war fantasy of distributed tank brigades supporting infantry across broad fronts. Instead, they mass tank armies, 1,000-vehicle formations, at breakthrough sectors. The T-34's advantage isn't its ability to win tank versus tank duels through superior tactics. Its advantage is being present in such numbers that tactics become irrelevant. 5 German tanks might destroy 15 Soviet tanks. Then the 16th, 17th, and 18th Soviet tanks destroy the German position. Principle 2. Maintain tempo through depth. Early Soviet offensives stalled when first echelon units exhausted themselves against German defenses. By 1943, Soviet commanders structure attacks in waves. First echelon breaches defenses, second echelon exploits the breach, third echelon maintains momentum. When a tank brigade loses 40% of its strength, which happens quickly, it's withdrawn and a fresh brigade passes through. German defenders face continuous assault without respite. Principle 3. Simplify command to match communication capabilities. Soviet tanks still largely lack radios. Rather than fight this limitation, Soviet doctrine accepts it. Tank companies receive simple, inflexible orders. Attack this objective. Advance to this line. Hold this position. Company commanders lead from the front. Subordinate tanks follow. It's crude compared to German radio-coordinated tactics, but it works when you have numerical superiority. Principle 4. Combine arms at all levels. The disasters of 1941 taught Soviet commanders that tanks without infantry support die quickly. By 1943, every tank brigade includes motorized rifle battalions, infantry mounted in trucks or riding on the tanks themselves. Engineers accompany armor to clear minefields. Artillery moves with the tanks, providing immediate fire support. Self-propelled guns, essentially tank chassis mounting heavy guns, supplement the T-34's firepower. These principles are being refined at the Armored Forces Academy in Moscow, where Colonel General Yakov Fedorenko oversees the development of Soviet tank doctrine. Officers rotating from the front attend intensive courses, analyzing recent battles, identifying lessons, standardizing tactics. The best practices are compiled into field manuals distributed to frontline units. The manuals are remarkably candid about the T-34's limitations. The tank's two-man turret crew, commander and gunner, is inadequate compared to German three-man turrets where the commander directs the battle while the gunner focuses on shooting. Soviet tankers compensate through simpler tactics that reduce the commander's workload. The cramped interior and poor visibility are acknowledged as design flaws that cannot be fixed without halting production. Crews are trained to compensate. Commanders spend more time with their heads out of the turret despite the danger. Drivers learn to navigate by following the tank ahead through dust and smoke. Meanwhile, the T-34 itself continues evolving, slowly, conservatively, always prioritizing production volume over performance improvements. In late 1942, the T-34-85 enters development. This variant replaces the 76.2 mm gun with an 85 mm weapon, providing better armor penetration to counter Germany's new heavy tanks. The turret is enlarged to accommodate 3 crew members, commander, gunner, loader. Visibility improves through better periscopes. The T-34-85 is a substantially better tank than the model 1941. It won't enter mass production until 1944. Changing production lines takes time, and during that time, no tanks are being built. Soviet planners decide to continue building 76 mm variants while slowly transitioning factories to the new model. This means Soviet forces will fight much of 1943 and early 1944 with a tank they know is increasingly obsolete against German Panthers and Tigers. They accept this trade-off because obsolete tanks and quantities still win battles. The German response to Soviet numerical superiority is to retreat into defensive warfare that leverage their tactical skills. The Panther and Tiger tanks, now entering service in meaningful numbers, are optimized for defense, powerful guns that can kill at long range, heavy armor that can absorb hits, designed to fight from prepared positions where mobility matters less. German doctrine emphasizes killing Soviet tanks before they close to effective range. It works, to a point. A single Tiger positioned in a defensive line can destroy dozens of T-34s as they advance across open ground. German after-action reports from 1943 contain kill ratios that would be unbelievable if they weren't consistently documented. One Tiger knocking out 23 Soviet tanks near Kursk. A Panther company destroying 4 to 7 tanks in one engagement. Individual crews with 50-plus kills. But kill ratios don't win wars when the enemy can replace losses, and you cannot. Germany produces 1,850 Panthers in 1943. The Soviet Union produces 15,833 T-34s. Even if every Panther kills 10 T-34s before being destroyed, which they don't, the arithmetic favors the Soviets. Moreover, Soviet crews are getting better. The tankers of 1943 aren't the poly-trained conscripts of 1941. They are veterans who've survived multiple battles, or they are new recruits trained by veterans using lessons learned from actual combat. The learning curve is steep, and it's paid for in blood, but it's real. Lieutenant Maria Oktyabrskaya receives 4 weeks of training at the Chelyabinsk Tank School before joining the 26th Guards Tank Brigade. Her instructors are surprised by her competence. She's older than most recruits, more focused, driven by a fury that makes her push through exhaustion. She learns to drive, to shoot, to perform basic maintenance. She learns the brutal mathematics of tank combat. If you button up inside the tank, you're safer from small arms fire but nearly blind. If you keep your head out for visibility, a rifle bullet can kill you. She chooses visibility. She's not here to be safe. By March 1943, the strategic balance on the Eastern Front has fundamentally shifted. Germany can still win tactical victories. The Wehrmacht remains the most tactically proficient army in the world, but it can no longer win operationally or strategically. Soviet industry produces more weapons. Soviet manpower reserves absorb horrific losses and continue fighting, and Soviet generals have learned how to mass forces for breakthrough operations. At Stavka, the Soviet High Command, Marshal Georgy Zhukov plans the summer offensive. He has 5 tank armies available, each comprising 500 to 800 tanks plus supporting arms. He has reserves, another 3,000 tanks positioned behind the front lines, ready to exploit any breakthrough. He has air support. The Red Air Force, decimated in 1941, has rebuilt and now contests German air superiority. He has artillery, thousands of guns concentrated to pulverize defensive positions before armor attacks. Most importantly, he has a plan that accepts losses as inevitable and plans around them. Soviet offensives in 1943 will typically lose 60 to 70% of attacking armor in the first week. German commanders cite these casualties as evidence of Soviet tactical incompetence. They miss the point. The Soviets can afford these losses. Germany cannot afford its smaller casualties. The question is no longer whether Soviet industry can produce enough tanks. It demonstrably can. The question is whether Soviet crews and commanders can use these tanks effectively enough to grind through German defenses. The answer is being written in real time across a 1,000-kilometer front, in burnt-out villages and muddy fields, in tank battles that consume hundreds of vehicles in single afternoons. The answer is yes, they can. Not elegantly, not efficiently by Western standards, but effectively enough to keep advancing. Lieutenant Oktyabrskay's T-34 rolls off Assembly Line 7 on March 19, 1943. She walks around it slowly, checking welds, testing the track tension, running her hand along the sloped glassy plate. The tank is ugly. Crude welds, rough finish, asymmetric turret casting. It's also exactly what she needs, a weapon that will carry her into battle and, she hopes, allow her to kill Germans. Fighting Girlfriend is painted on the turret that evening. The crew, Commander Oktyabrskaya, driver, gunner, loader, spend 3 days learning to work together. Then they entrain for the Western Front, where Army Group Center holds a defensive line that Soviet planners have designated for destruction. The train carrying Oktyabrskaya's tank is one of 50 trains moving armor west that week. Each train carries 25 to 30 T-34s. Do the arithmetic, 1,250 to 1,500 tanks repositioning for the coming offensive, and that's just 1 week's movement on one section of the front. German reconnaissance observes the buildup. Reports flow to Berlin estimating Soviet tank strength at various sectors. The estimates are accurate. They change nothing. Germany lacks the industrial capacity to match Soviet production, lacks the manpower to replace losses at Soviet rates, lacks the fuel reserves to sustain mobile operations against an enemy that can absorb punishment and continue attacking. But Hitler refuses to consider strategic withdrawal or negotiated peace. The war will continue until one side achieves total victory or collapses completely. Given the production numbers, given the kill ratios despite German tactical superiority, given the mathematics of attrition warfare, the outcome is increasingly clear. In Tankigrad, Assembly Line 7 completes another T-34. And another. And another. The line never stops. June 19, 1944. Stavka Headquarters, Moscow. Marshal Georgy Zhukov spreads the map across the planning table. The map shows the entire Eastern Front from the Baltic to the Black Sea, a line that has barely moved in 6 months. Army Group Center, the Wehrmacht's largest formation, comprising 1.2 million men, occupies a massive salient bulging westward into Soviet-held territory, centered on the Belarusian city of Minsk. Around the table stand the architects of the coming offensive, Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky, Chief of the General Staff, Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, Commander of 1st Belarusian Front, Marshal Ivan Cherniakovsky, Commander of 3rd Belarusian Front, and Colonel General Ivan Bagramian, Commander of 1st Baltic Front. These men have collectively commanded operations that destroyed German armies at Stalingrad, smashed the Kursk offensive, liberated Ukraine. Now they plan the largest Soviet operation of the war. Zhukov's finger traces the German salient. Army Group Center believes itself secure, he says. They expect our summer offensive in the south, toward Romania. German intelligence has observed our deception operations, dummy tank concentrations, false radio traffic, reconnaissance activity near Lvov. They believe what we want them to believe. This is accurate. Since March, Soviet Maskirovka, military deception, has been conducting an elaborate campaign to convince German intelligence that the summer offensive will target Army Group North Ukraine in the south. Fake tank armies have been assembled using wooden mock-ups that aerial reconnaissance photographs. Radio operators transmit dummy traffic coordinating fictitious units. Reconnaissance patrols probe German defenses south of the Pripyat marshes, suggesting preparation for offensive operations. German intelligence has intercepted Soviet communications, observed the buildup, and concluded that the main Soviet effort will come in Ukraine. This assessment is logical. Ukraine contains Romania's oil fields at Ploieti, Germany's primary fuel source. Cutting off Romanian oil would cripple Wehrmacht mobility. Therefore, German reserves, including precious panzer divisions, have been positioned south of the Pripyat marshes. Army Group Center, meanwhile, holds a static line with minimal armor support. The sector has been quiet for months. German High Command considers it secure. They are catastrophically wrong. While German attention focuses south, the Soviets have secretly concentrated 2.5 million men, 5,200 tanks, and 5,300 aircraft opposite Army Group Center. The logistics alone represent a triumph of Soviet staff work, millions of rounds of ammunition, tens of thousands of tons of fuel, food for 2 million soldiers, all moved into position under conditions of absolute secrecy. The deception operates at multiple levels. Tank movements occur only at night, with vehicles concealed under camouflage netting during daylight. Radio silence is maintained. All coordination happens through courier. Bridge construction, necessary for moving armor across Belarus's rivers, is performed underwater, with pontoon bridges submerged just below the surface, invisible to German reconnaissance aircraft. Entire tank armies deploy within 30 kilometers of German lines without being detected. The Soviet plan is elegantly brutal. Simultaneous breakthrough operations at 6 points along Army Group Center's front, followed by deep penetration toward Minsk. The German salient will be cut at its base, encircling hundreds of thousands of troops who will be destroyed in place. It's the same encirclement strategy Germany used so successfully in 1941, now perfected and applied by Soviet commanders who learned from their defeats. The operation is named Bagration, after a Georgian general who fought Napoleon in 1812. The symbolism is deliberate. Just as Russia defeated one invader, so it will defeat another. Zhukov assigned sectors. Rokossovsky's first Belarusian front will strike from the south, targeting Bobruisk. Cherniakovsky's third Belarusian front will attack toward Vitebsk in the north. Bagramian's first Baltic front will envelope Vitebsk from the northwest. Zakharov's second Belarusian front, not represented at this meeting, will assault the center toward Mogilev. Each front commands multiple combined arms armies, typically comprising 5 to 7 rifle divisions, mechanized corps, tank brigades, artillery regiments, and air support. The tank forces alone number over 5,000 vehicles, of which roughly 3,500 are T-34s. The remainder are light tanks, heavy IS-2 breakthrough tanks, and self-propelled guns. But the T-34 remains the backbone, reliable, producible, available in overwhelming numbers. Tank armies will not be committed until breakthrough is achieved, Zhukov emphasizes. First echelon rifle divisions supported by infantry tanks will rupture German defenses. Once the breach is confirmed, tank armies exploit toward operational depth. Speed is essential. We must reach Minsk before Army Group Center can establish coherent defensive lines. This represents evolved Soviet operational art. The disasters of 1941 to 1942 taught brutal lessons about committing armor prematurely. Throwing tanks at prepared defenses produces burning wrecks, not breakthroughs. The correct sequences: artillery preparation pulverizes defenses, rifle divisions assault and create breach, engineers clear obstacles. Then, only then, massed armor pours through the gap and races into the enemy's rear. The meeting continues for 7 hours. Every detail is examined: artillery fire plans, ammunition expenditure rates, fuel consumption, medical evacuation procedures, communication protocols. Soviet planning by 1944 has achieved a sophistication that would have been impossible 3 years earlier. The Red Army that improvised desperately during Barbarossa now coordinates multi-front operations involving millions of soldiers with industrial precision. Marshal Vasilevsky addresses the question everyone is thinking. What happens when we encounter their armor? The Germans have redeployed Tiger and Panther battalions. Our T-34-76 cannot penetrate their frontal armor at combat ranges. Zhukov's response is characteristically direct. We don't fight their Tigers frontally. We fix them with artillery and infantry while tank brigades maneuver to flanks and rear. We accept that breakthrough operations will cost us 40 to 50% of committed armor. We have reserves. They don't. This is the central calculation of Operation Bagration. The Soviets will lose more tanks than the Germans. They will lose more men. They will lose more equipment. And they will win anyway, because Soviet losses are sustainable while German losses are not. The stark mathematics: Soviet tank production in April 1944 was 1,800 vehicles. German production was 930, of which only 250 were medium or heavy tanks suitable for frontline combat. Soviet factories replace losses faster than battles destroy tanks. German factories cannot. Every Panther destroyed in Belarus is irreplaceable. Every T-34 destroyed is replaced within a week. Moreover, Soviet armor doctrine has evolved to minimize tank versus tank combat. The T-34's mission isn't to duel Panthers, it's to penetrate deep into German rear areas, destroying supply lines, command posts, artillery positions, and infantry concentrations. Let German armor react, let it move, let it consume irreplaceable fuel chasing Soviet tank brigades. Mobile defense favors the side with fuel reserves and mechanical reliability. By mid-1944, Germany has neither. The Soviets also possess overwhelming artillery superiority. Operation Bagration will open with the largest artillery barrage in military history, over 31,000 guns and mortars firing for 2 hours on a front of 500 kilometers. German defensive positions will be obliterated before Soviet infantry advances. The barrage density, number of guns per kilometer of front, exceeds even Kursk. German survivors will describe the bombardment as apocalyptic, a wall of explosions that collapses trenches, destroys bunkers, kills radio operators, and shatters the psychological cohesion of defending units. After artillery devastates defenses, ground attack aircraft, Ilyushin Illinois II Stermoviks, will starve German positions with cannon and rockets. The Red Air Force has achieved numerical superiority through the same mass production philosophy that dominates tank output. Soviet aircraft are less sophisticated than German fighters, but there are 3 Soviet planes for every German plane, and quantity enables the Soviets to maintain continuous air cover over advancing forces. German Army Group Center, commanded by General Feldmarschall Ernst Busch, remains unaware of the impending catastrophe. German intelligence reports Soviet activity as normal for a quiet sector. Radio intercepts suggest no unusual troop concentrations. Aerial reconnaissance observes standard defensive preparations. The elaborate Soviet Maskirovka works perfectly. Busch's forces are spread thin, holding a 500-kilometer front with insufficient reserves. The panzer divisions that might blunt a Soviet breakthrough are positioned 200 kilometers south, guarding against the expected offensive in Ukraine. German doctrine requires mobile reserves to counterattack penetrations rapidly. Army Group Center lacks these reserves. When the Soviet breakthrough comes, Busch will have no operational flexibility. Hitler has also issued one of his infamous fortress orders. Key cities must be held at all costs. No retreat permitted. This policy, learned from the desperate winter of 1941-42 when German armies nearly collapsed, is strategically disastrous in 1944. Holding cities allows Soviet forces to bypass strongpoints and encircle defenders. The fortress garrisons, rather than conducting mobile defense, become trapped pockets that are systematically destroyed. On June 19th, Zhukov concludes the planning conference. Operation Bagration will commence on June 23rd, the 3rd anniversary of Operation Barbarossa. The symbolism is intentional. 3 years ago, German armies invaded Soviet territory. Now, Soviet armies will begin the liberation that will end in Berlin. 400 kilometers west, in the forests of Belarus, Soviet tank armies complete their final approach marches. The T-34s move at night, engines throttled to reduce noise, tracks muffled with cloth. During daylight, they shelter under trees, covered with camouflage nets and branches. German reconnaissance aircraft pass overhead, observing nothing unusual. The 5th Guards Tank Army, over 700 tanks, positions itself 20 kilometers behind 1st Belarusian front lines. The 2nd Guards Tank Army deploys near 3rd Belarusian front. Each army comprises 2 tank corps and 1 mechanized corps, organized into brigades of 50 to 65 tanks each. The formation structure allows rapid exploitation. Lead brigades punch through broken defenses. Follow-on brigades maintain momentum. Reserves sustain offensive operations when leading elements exhaust themselves. Tank crews receive final briefings. Maps are distributed showing German positions, remarkably accurate maps, compiled from partisan intelligence, aerial reconnaissance, and prisoner interrogations. Commanders emphasize the operational objective. Don't get bogged down fighting German strongpoints, bypass resistance, drive deep into rear areas, sever communications and supply lines. Let rifle divisions reduce surrounded garrisons. Tank armies must maintain tempo. Fuel and ammunition are stockpiled in concealed dumps. Each T-34 carries 460 liters of diesel, enough for 300 kilometers on roads, less cross-country. Additional fuel moves forward in trucks, vulnerable to German air attack but necessary for sustained operations. Ammunition allocation is generous, 77 rounds per tank, mix of armor-piercing and high explosive. Crews are told to expect resupply within 48 hours of commencing operations. Maintenance crews perform final inspections. The T-34's mechanical simplicity enables field repairs that would be impossible with more complex designs. Thrown tracks can be replaced in 30 minutes. Engine swaps take 4 hours if spare engines are available. The transmission, still notoriously difficult to shift, is checked for worn synchronizers. Guns are bore-sighted. Periscopes cleaned. Radios tested in the minority of tanks equipped with them. By June 22nd, all forces are in position. Along a 500-kilometer front, 2.5 million Soviet soldiers wait for the order to attack. They vastly outnumber their opponents. The Soviets possess a 4-to-1 advantage in infantry, 8-to-1 in armor, 6-to-1 in artillery, and 5-to-1 in aircraft. These ratios guarantee victory, assuming competent execution. The question is not whether Operation Bagration will succeed. The question is how thoroughly it will destroy Army Group Center, and whether German forces can escape before Soviet pincers close around them. In Moscow, Stalin reviews the final operational plan and approves it. He has learned to trust his marshals, learned, slowly, painfully, that micromanaging military operations leads to disaster. Zhukov and Vasilevsky have earned autonomy through success. They will conduct Bagration their way. At 5 a.m. on June 23, 1944, exactly 3 years after Barbarossa commenced, Soviet artillery opens fire. The trap springs shut. June 23, 1944, 5 a.m. German defensive positions near Vitebsk, Belorussia. Obergefreiter Hans Weber crouches in his dugout, trying to sleep through the pre-dawn cold. He's 19 years old, a machine gunner with the 246th Infantry Division, stationed in Belorussia for 8 months. The sector has been quiet, occasional partisan activity, sporadic Soviet probing attacks, nothing serious. Last week, his company commander mentioned rumors of a Soviet buildup to the south, in Ukraine. Hey, nothing changes. Same trenches, same routine, same boredom. At 5 a.m. precisely, the world ends. The first salvo arrives without warning. No preliminary ranging shots, no gradual buildup. 31,000 Soviet guns fire simultaneously across a 500-kilometer front. The sound is beyond comprehension, beyond anything human neurology evolved to process. It's not thunder. Thunder is a single event. This is continuous, overlapping, a physical pressure against the eardrums that makes rational thought impossible. Weber's dugout collapses in the first minute. The timber roof beams splinter. Dirt cascades down. The entrance tunnel caves in. He's buried in darkness, suffocating, clawing at earth. Somehow he excavates himself, emerges into a landscape transformed into hell. The trench line no longer exists as a coherent structure, just a series of craters, each overlapping the next, filled with smoke and dust and the screaming of wounded men whose voices can barely be heard over the artillery. He runs. There's no other option. Running in an artillery barrage is suicide. You're just as likely to run into an incoming shell as away from one, but staying in place is certain death. The barrage is methodical, walking across German positions in pre-planned sectors, spending 5 minutes obliterating each 100-meter square before shifting to the next. Weber runs through smoke so thick he can't see 3 meters ahead, stumbles over bodies and body parts, falls into craters, climbs out, keeps running. The 246th Infantry Division ceases to exist as a functional unit in the first 30 minutes. Not destroyed completely. Pockets of survivors will fight for hours, even days, but shattered organizationally. Communications trenches are obliterated. Telephone lines to battalion headquarters are cut. Radio operators are dead or their equipment is destroyed. Company and platoon commanders are killed or separated from their units. Soldiers who survive the initial barrage huddle in whatever cover they can find, deaf from a concussion, waiting for it to stop. It doesn't stop. The barrage continues for 2 hours. The artillery preparation is unprecedented in military history. The Soviets fired 2.5 million shells in 120 minutes, approximately 350 shells per second across the entire front. The barrage density in breakthrough sectors reaches 250 guns per kilometer, meaning every meter of German trench line receives multiple direct hits. Bunkers designed to withstand artillery are collapsed by repeated impacts. Trenches are filled in. Minefields are detonated or churned into usefulness. Barbed wire obstacles are pulverized. At 7 a.m., the artillery shifts to deeper targets, German artillery positions, command posts, supply dumps, reserve positions. Soviet infantry emerges from assembly trenches and advances. The German survivors, those who lived through the barrage, face overwhelming numbers. Soviet rifle divisions attack in wave formations, first echelon, second echelon, third echelon, each wave 500 meters behind the previous, ensuring that if the first wave is stopped, the second wave is already approaching. The tactic accepts horrific casualties. It also guarantees that German defensive fires cannot stop everyone. Accompanying the infantry are infantry support tanks, T-34s moving slowly, firing high explosive rounds at surviving German positions, crushing obstacles, providing mobile cover for advancing riflemen. These aren't the tank armies, those remain in reserve, just organic tank support assigned to rifle divisions. But there are hundreds of them, spread across the front, enough to overwhelm the few German anti-tank guns that survived the barrage. Obergefreiter Weber, sheltering in a shell crater with 4 other survivors from his company, watches Soviet infantry approach through the smoke. There are dozens of them, moving in loose formations, firing submachine guns from the hip. Behind them, a T-34 grinds forward, its 76mm gun swiveling toward German positions. Weber's milligram 42 machine gun is buried somewhere under 2 meters of date. His rifle is lost. He has a pistol with 8 rounds. The soldier next to him, Unteroffizier Klein, who yesterday was shouting orders and maintaining discipline, is shaking uncontrollably, muttering prayers. The decision is obvious: surrender or die. Weber stands up slowly, hands raised, shouting "Kamerad." The Soviet infantry sees him, shouts something in Russian, gestures for him to walk forward. He complies. Klein and the others follow. They are alive. They are prisoners. The war, for them, is over. This scene repeats across the breakthrough sectors. German infantry divisions, pulverized by artillery and overwhelmed by numerical superiority, disintegrate. Some units fight with desperate courage. German soldiers are still among the best trained in the world, but courage without support is meaningless. They are outnumbered, unsupported, often surrounded, and they die or surrender in vast numbers. By noon on June 23rd, Soviet forces have penetrated 10 to 15 kilometers into German positions at multiple points. The breaches are expanding, widening, merging into continuous ruptures of the defensive line. German reserves rush forward to contain the penetrations, but the reserves are inadequate, cobbled together from rear area units, training battalions, support troops pressed into infantry roles. At Army Group Center headquarters in Minsk, General Feldmarshal Busch receives fragmentary reports of Soviet attacks across his entire front. The scale is unclear. Communications are disrupted. Unit commanders are dead or out of contact. The picture is chaos. Busch requests permission from Hitler to conduct tactical withdrawals, shortening his line, establishing defensible positions. Hitler refuses. The fortresses must hold. No retreat. This is the fatal decision. Without mobility, without the ability to conduct fighting withdrawals while preserving unit cohesion, German forces become static targets. The Soviet plan depends on German inflexibility, attacking fortress cities from multiple directions, encircling garrisons, bypassing strongpoints while continuing the advance. On June 24th, the tank armies commit. The 5th Guards Tank Army, having waited 24 hours while rifle divisions created the breach, receives the order to exploit. 700 T-34s, organized into brigades and battalions, pour through gaps in German lines and accelerate toward operational depth. Their mission, advance 40 to 50 kilometers per day, bypass German strongpoints, reach Minsk, cut off army group centers' retreat routes. This is what the T-34 was designed for. Not careful defensive fighting, not precision gunnery duels, but rapid exploitation through broken defenses. The wide tracks handle Belarusian terrain, mud, forests, streams, that would bog down German tanks. The diesel engines, less powerful than German gasoline engines but more fuel efficient, provide operational range German tanks cannot match. The simple mechanical systems allow field repairs during brief halts. The Soviet tankers of 1944 are not the raw recruits of 1941. They are veterans, survivors of 3 years of the most intense armored combat in history. They know their tanks' capabilities and limitations. They know how to navigate by compass when landmarks are obliterated. They know how to maintain formation through smoke and dust. They know how to bypass resistance rather than getting bogged down fighting German rearguards. Lieutenant Maria Oktyabrskaya, whose fighting girlfriend T-34 has survived a year of combat, commands a tank in the 26th Guards Tank Brigade, part of the exploitation force. Her crew has fought through Ukraine, through Poland, accumulated 9 confirmed kills, German tanks, self-propelled guns, towed anti-tank guns. She's been wounded twice, refused evacuation both times, returned to her tank after field hospitals patched her up. Now fighting girlfriend races through Belarusian forests, following the tank ahead through dust, part of a column advancing toward Minsk. The landscape blurs past, burning villages, abandoned German vehicles, occasional clusters of prisoners under guard. They halt briefly for fuel, pumped from trucks that somehow kept pace. Oktyabrskaya's driver reports transmission trouble. The clutch is slipping, second gear grinding, but it's manageable. They push forward. German counterattacks materialize sporadically. A Panther battalion, rushed forward from reserve, engages the advancing Soviet column. The Panther's 75mm gun can destroy a T-34 at 1,500 meters. The Panthers position themselves in tree lines, in defensive positions, trying to create killing zones. The Soviet response is not to engage in gunnery duels. It's to overwhelm. One T-34 brigade fixes the Panthers frontally, accepting losses, while 2 other brigades swing wide on flanks. The Panthers have superior guns, superior armor, superior optics. They also have inadequate numbers and no infantry support. When T-34s appear on their flanks and rear, the Panthers must reposition or die. Repositioning consumes time and fuel. The Soviet advance continues. This is the nightmare scenario German commanders feared. Mass Soviet armor, competently employed, advancing faster than German reserves can react. The Wehrmacht's tactical advantages, superior training, better tank versus tank performance, more effective combined arms coordination, become irrelevant when Soviet forces bypass strongpoints and maintain operational tempo. By June 26th, Soviet spearheads have advanced 70 kilometers beyond the original front line. German defensive positions that withstood Soviet assaults for months are suddenly behind Soviet lines, cut off, surrounded. The fortress cities, Vitebsk, Bobruisk, Mogilev, are encircled. German garrisons, obeying Hitler's no-retreat orders, prepare to hold out. They will die in place. The Soviets have no intention of wasting time reducing fortresses, when mobile operations can continue. Rifle divisions encircle the cities, artillery bombards them systematically. But the tank armies keep moving. Let the garrisons starve. Let them run out of ammunition. Let them surrender when they realize no relief is coming. At Vitebsk, 35,000 German soldiers are surrounded. At Bobruisk, 40,000. These are experienced troops, veterans, equipped with heavy weapons and adequate ammunition. Under different circumstances, they could have conducted fighting withdrawals, preserving their combat power, establishing new defensive lines. Instead, they are trapped, ordered to hold, consumed in battles that achieve nothing. The Luftwaffe attempts to resupply surrounded garrisons by air, the same strategy that failed catastrophically at Stalingrad. Soviet fighters, Yak-3s and La-5s, intercept German transport aircraft, shooting down hundreds. Some supplies get through, but not enough. The garrison slowly collapses under constant bombardment and dwindling supplies. Meanwhile, Soviet tank armies converge on Minsk from multiple directions. The city is Army Group Center's logistics hub, rail yards, supply depots, hospitals, headquarters facilities. Capturing Minsk will cut off German forces still fighting east of the city, trap them in pockets, destroy them systematically. By June 29th, the scope of the disaster is clear to German High Command. Army Group Center has lost 350,000 soldiers, killed, wounded, or surrounded. The Soviets have advanced 200 kilometers in 6 days. The front line, which held stable for months, has collapsed completely. 28 German divisions have been destroyed or encircled. Hitler, confronted with the worst German defeat since Stalingrad, looks for scapegoats. General Feldmarschall Busch is relieved of command, replaced by General Feldmarschall Walter Model. Model is Germany's finest defensive commander, a master of improvisation in desperate situations. He arrives at the collapsing front and immediately grasps the reality. There's nothing to defend with. The units on organizational charts no longer exist. The reserves that should be available have been destroyed or encircled. The logistics infrastructure is in Soviet hands. Model does what Bush should have been allowed to do a week earlier. Orders general retreat. Forget the fortresses. Forget Hitler's stand-fast orders. Save whatever forces can be saved. It's too late. Soviet mechanized columns have already penetrated so deeply that orderly retreat is impossible. German units attempt to withdraw and discover Soviet tanks blocking the roads behind them. In Moscow, Stalin follows the operation's progress with grim satisfaction. For 3 years, German armies advanced across Soviet territory, encircling Soviet forces, destroying armies, capturing cities. Now the tables have turned. Soviet armies are conducting the same deep penetration operations, using the same tactics, achieving the same devastating results. The T-34, that tank Hitler dismissed as Soviet propaganda, that design German intelligence underestimated, that crude vehicle built in primitive factories by barely trained workers, has become the instrument of German destruction. Not because individual T-34s are superior to Panthers or Tigers, not because Soviet tankers are more skilled than German crews, but because there are 5,000 T-34s in Belarusia, advancing simultaneously, and Germany cannot stop them all. By early July, Minsk falls. The encirclement is complete. 100,000 German soldiers are trapped east of the city, surrounded, cut off, doomed. July 3, 1944. Minsk-Bobryansk Road, 40 kilometers east of Minsk, Belarusia. The remnants of the German Ninth Army attempt to break out of encirclement. 60,000 soldiers, what's left of 4 divisions, move west in a column that stretches for 20 kilometers. Infantry on foot, horse-drawn artillery, a handful of functioning vehicles struggling through mud. They are exhausted, hungry, low on ammunition, pursued by Soviet forces that smell blood. Soviet reconnaissance aircraft circle overhead, radioing coordinates to artillery batteries and tank brigades. The Illinois II Stamoviks dive repeatedly, strafing the column with 23mm cannons, dropping fragmentation bombs into the densest concentrations of troops. German anti-aircraft guns return fire, shooting down some attackers, but there are always more aircraft. The Luftwaffe is absent, outnumbered, outmatched, conserving its remaining strength for the defense of Germany itself. At the head of the column, General Lieutenant Hans Jordan, commander of the shattered Ninth Army, rides in one of the few operational vehicles. He knows the breakout will fail. Soviet forces have established blocking positions across every road west. Tank brigades wait in ambush. Artillery has pre-registered coordinates on likely escape routes. But surrender is unthinkable. Hitler has decreed that officers who surrender will have their families arrested. So Jordan leads his men forward into a battle he knows they cannot win. The column reaches the village of Pukovichi at noon. Soviet forces have transformed the village into a killing zone. T-34s are positioned in concealed positions around the approaches. Infantry occupies buildings and tree lines. Artillery forward observers watch from the church steeple. The Germans have no choice but to attack. Retreat means slower death by starvation and air attack. The assault begins with the few remaining German tanks, 3 Panzer IVs and a single Panther, survivors of a Panzer battalion that entered Belarusia with 60 vehicles. They advanced toward the village, firing high-explosive shells at suspected Soviet positions. The Panther's 75mm gun destroys a T-34 at 800 meters, a clean kill through the turret. Then the Panther throws a track on rough ground and becomes immobile. The crew bails out and retreats on foot. The Panzer IVs reach the village outskirts before Soviet T-34s emerge from concealed positions on both flanks. The exchange is brief and one-sided. Panzer IVs, with their 75mm short-barreled guns and thin armor, are obsolete by 1944 standards. The T-34s fire from 300 meters, close enough that even the 76mm gun penetrates easily. All three Panzer IVs are destroyed within 90 seconds. German infantry attacks without armor support, advancing in desperate rushes, trying to close with Soviet positions where their small arms might be effective. Soviet machine guns cut them down in swaths. Those who reach the village buildings face Soviet infantry armed with submachine guns, PP-41s firing 900 rounds per minute, devastating in close quarters. The attack collapses. Survivors withdraw, carrying wounded, leaving hundreds of dead in the approaches. General Lieutenant Jordan receives reports that other breakout attempts have also failed. The encirclement is complete. Soviet forces press from all directions. His options have narrowed to two: surrender or die fighting. At 4 p.m. hours, he orders surrender. White flags appear along the column. Soviet infantry approaches cautiously, accepting the capitulation of 60,000 German soldiers. This scene repeats across a dozen pockets throughout Belarusia. Army Group Center, which began Operation Bagration with 1.2 million soldiers, no longer exists as a coherent force. In 3 weeks, the Soviets have destroyed 28 divisions completely, mauled another 50 divisions, captured 200,000 prisoners, killed or wounded another 300,000. It is the single worst German defeat of the entire war, larger than Stalingrad, more devastating than Kursk, more catastrophic than any Western Allied victory. The scale of destruction is difficult to comprehend. 28 divisions, gone. Not withdrawn, not degraded, but annihilated. The Germans lose 2,000 tanks and assault guns, 10,000 artillery pieces, 57,000 vehicles. Army Group Center's combat power is reduced by 75%. The Eastern Front, which ran through central Belarusia, now runs through eastern Poland. Soviet forces have liberated 600 kilometers of Soviet territory in 3 weeks. The T-34's role in this victory is central but not exclusive. Soviet success derives from multiple factors: numerical superiority, improved command and control, effective artillery preparation, air supremacy, German strategic inflexibility. But the T-34 provided the operational mobility that transformed tactical breakthroughs into strategic collapse. Without mass armor to exploit penetrations, Soviet rifle divisions would have fought yard by yard, giving German forces time to establish new defensive lines. The T-34 speed, 50 kilometers per hour on roads, 25 cross-country, enabled Soviet commanders to advance faster than German reserves could respond. The tank's mechanical reliability proved crucial. Operation Bagration required sustained high-tempo operations across terrible terrain, forests, swamps, rivers, roads destroyed by German demolitions. Complex German tanks, Panthers with their temperamental transmissions, Tigers with their fuel-hungry engines, broke down constantly in these conditions. The T-34, crude and simple, kept running. When T-34s did break down, field maintenance teams repaired them quickly using basic tools and interchangeable parts. Soviet after-action reports document losses, approximately 2,900 tanks destroyed or damaged during Operation Bagration, of which roughly 2,000 were T-34s. By German standards, these are catastrophic casualties, 70% of the attacking force. By Soviet standards, these are acceptable losses in a successful operation. The tank armies that entered Belarusia with 5,200 tanks finished with 2,300 functional vehicles, but they'd accomplished their mission, and replacement tanks were already en route from factories in the Urals. German losses, meanwhile, are irreplaceable. The 2,000 tanks destroyed in Belarusia represent nearly 3 months of total German production. Germany has neither the industrial capacity nor the time to rebuild Army Group Center. Eastern Front reinforcements must come from other sectors, stripping Army Group North, weakening defenses in Poland, pulling reserves from Western Europe where Allied forces are advancing from Normandy. At Führer headquarters in East Prussia, Hitler rages against his generals. How could this happen? How could Army Group Center collapse so quickly? He demands explanations, investigations, courts-martial. The explanations are unwelcome. Soviet forces outnumbered German defenders 4-1 in infantry, 8-1 in armor. Soviet artillery preparation destroyed defensive positions before infantry attacked. Soviet air superiority prevented aerial reconnaissance and interdicted German supply lines. Soviet operational art, refined through 3 years of defeats, now matches German capabilities. Most unwelcome is the mathematical reality. Germany is losing the production war catastrophically. In June 1944, Soviet factories produced 1,800 T-34s. German factories produced 930 tanks of all types. The production ratio, 2-1 in Soviet favor, guarantees eventual German defeat regardless of tactical competence. Germany can win individual battles and still lose the war through simple attrition. Hitler rejects this analysis. Germany will produce new wonder weapons, jet aircraft, super heavy tanks, ballistic missiles, that will reverse the tide through technological superiority. Resources that could expand conventional tank production instead flow to experimental programs. The Maus super heavy tank at 188 tons, too heavy to cross most bridges. The Mi-262 jet fighter, revolutionary but available in inadequate numbers. The V-2 ballistic missile, impressive engineering that accomplishes nothing militarily. The T-34, meanwhile, continues evolving incrementally. The T-34-85 enters mass production in early 1944, featuring the 85mm gun, 3-man turret, improved visibility. It's still inferior to the Panther in direct combat. The Panther's 75mm gun has better penetration. The Panther's armor is thicker. The Panther's optics are superior. But the Soviets produced 12,000 T-34-85s by war's end. Germany produces 6,000 Panthers total. Quantity remains the decisive factor. Lieutenant Maria Oktyabrskaya's fighting girlfriend survives Operation Bagration. Her crew destroys 3 German tanks, 2 self-propelled guns, and numerous soft-skinned vehicles during the advance. On August 17, 1944, near Vilnius, Lithuania, a German anti-tank gun penetrates her tank's hull, wounding Oktyabrskaya critically. She dies 2 months later from her wounds, posthumously awarded Hero of the Soviet Union, the highest Soviet military decoration. Her story is exceptional in its individual detail but representative in its broader meaning. The T-34 carried hundreds of thousands of Soviet soldiers westward, most anonymously, many dying in the process, collectively overwhelming German resistance through numbers and sacrifice. By August 1944, Soviet forces have reached the borders of East Prussia, German territory proper. The psychological impact is profound. For 3 years, German soldiers fought in foreign lands, France, Poland, Russia. Now the enemy stands at Germany's doorstep. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels exhorts Germans to total resistance, conjuring images of Bolshevik hordes raping and murdering their way through German cities. The propaganda is effective because it contains truth. Soviet forces entering Germany will indeed commit massive atrocities, retaliation for German atrocities in Soviet territory. But propaganda cannot create tanks that don't exist, cannot conjure fuel from empty refineries, cannot replace the 500,000 soldiers lost in Belarusia. Germany's strategic position has become untenable. In the west, Allied forces are advancing through France. In the south, Italy has surrendered and German forces are retreating northward. In the east, Soviet forces prepare for final offensives into Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Germany itself. The Eastern Front requires 4 million soldiers to hold, and Germany has perhaps 2.5 million available after Bagration. The deficit must be filled with boys from the Hitler Youth, old men from the Volkssturm, foreign volunteers from satellite states, hastily trained replacements. Quality collapses even as numbers remain superficially adequate. German armor doctrine also collapses. Pre-war doctrine emphasized mobile warfare, breakthrough operations, encirclements, rapid exploitation. By late 1944, German tanks fight almost exclusively on the defensive, positioned in prepared positions, firing at approaching Soviet armor from concealed locations. The tactics work locally. A Panther battalion properly positioned can destroy dozens of attacking T-34s, but they are strategically irrelevant. Soviet commanders accept losses, feed fresh tank brigades into attacks, overwhelm German positions through attrition. The final irony is that German engineers, who dismissed the T-34 in 1941, now recognize it as the war's best tank design relative to requirements. Not the best tank in absolute terms. The Panther is superior gun for gun, but the best design considering production requirements, maintenance needs, operational reliability, and strategic objectives. German intelligence estimates Soviet T-34 production at approximately 60,000 units by war's end, a number that would have seemed impossibly fantastic in 1941 but proves approximately accurate. Hitler, who laughed at reports of T-34 capabilities in 1941, is now trapped in his Berlin bunker, surrounded by Soviet forces equipped with T-34-85s. It is April 1945. Soviet tank armies have driven from Stalingrad to Berlin, 2,500 kilometers, destroying 3 German army groups, capturing hundreds of thousands of prisoners, liberating Soviet territory and conquering German territory. The T-34 has carried the Red Army from defensive desperation to total victory. On April 30, 1945, Soviet T-34s occupy positions within 1 kilometer of the Reich Chancellery. Artillery shells pound the bunker complex where Hitler makes his final decision. He commits suicide rather than face capture. Within days, Berlin surrenders. Within weeks, the European war ends. The final accounting: the Soviet Union produced approximately 84,000 tanks during the war, of which 58,000 were T-34s in various models. Germany produced 49,000 tanks total, of which only 6,000 were Panthers, the one German design that could consistently counter T-34s. The production ratio, 14 T-34s for every Panther, guaranteed German defeat regardless of tactical outcomes. Historians later debate Operation Bagation's significance. Some argue it was the decisive victory of the Eastern Front, more important than Stalingrad or Kursk because it destroyed Germany's strategic reserves and made defeat inevitable. Others note that Germany was already losing by June 1944. The question was when, not whether. But all agree on the central role of mass armor, particularly T-34s, in achieving operational level victory. The T-34's crude welds, rough finishes, and difficult transmission are irrelevant to its historical importance. What matters is that Soviet factories built 58,000 of them, that Soviet soldiers drove them from Moscow to Berlin, that German industry could never match Soviet production rates, and that simple machines produced in overwhelming numbers defeated sophisticated machines produced in inadequate quantities. General Feldmarschall Erich von Manstein, arguably Germany's finest operational commander, later writes in his memoirs, the T-34 was the best tank of the war, not because it was superior in any single characteristic, but because it was superior in the only characteristic that mattered. It existed in quantities that made victory possible. Hitler laughed at Stalin's T-34 reports in 1941. By 1944, 20,000 T-34s had crushed Army Group Center, destroyed Germany's strategic position, and made the fall of Berlin inevitable. The mockery had reversed. The laughter had stopped. The crude Soviet tank, dismissed as propaganda, had become the instrument of German defeat.